So if you were with us last week, you know that Tom gave the message, and he gave it from home in his playroom. And I don't know about you, but I left that like super inspired. I was like, next week we have to change things up. I mean, Tom, in his playroom, he had these shelves with games on them, and there were toys and pictures. He had a little whiteboard behind him with those little magnetic letters, and I'm looking at those letters like, is there some kind of secret code or message in there that he wants us to know that we've got to figure out, right? Maybe he's in trouble. And so it was like really inspiring, and I was like, we got to get out of the room that we normally record in. So if you can't tell, we're in my office. We're not down where we normally would be, and I just my setup is not as exciting as Tom's. Like, it's not as colorful. I don't have like all the paraphernalia that he had, but I thought maybe at least it could be a little change of scenery. And and if at any point you get bored, you can just check out and start looking at what's going on behind me. I mean, that's what we're all doing on our Zoom calls, right? Right? I mean, come on. You're looking at what's going on behind, looking at the bookshelves, like, okay, what kind of books are they reading? What's going on back there? And what's cool is you can tell who does it, right? There's all these other items that definitely are not strategically placed, because none of us are doing that. That I always stack my books like that, neat, and those books are just there coincidentally. And there's a mug perfectly centered with the Community Church logo perfectly displayed right there, and on top of that cubby right under my whiteboard, because that's totally a convenient place to put it, right? And that wasn't intentional either, wasn't strategically placed. Anyway, so we're in my office. Well, thanks for hanging out with us today. If you're new to our little online community, my name's Lou. I'm really happy that you decided to connect with us, and I'd love to connect with you. If you would take just a minute to go over to communitychurch.net/connect. There's a little form on there, and if you fill it out, that'll help us get to know you a little bit. We'll send you some information, kind of keep you up to date on what's happening here. We're not going to flood your inbox with emails. We're not going to sell your information or anything like that, but we really like to know when we have new people hanging out with us. And if you do that for us, if you take just a minute to do that, we'll send you a gift card this week in the mail just to say thanks. So around here, we take kids programs really seriously. We take kids really seriously around here. We don't think we should just shove them in the corner because they're, smaller than us. So every week we send out 3 programs for kids, and they're usually released right about the time that the service is released for the week. There's one for preschool kids, elementary school kids, and preteens. My kids like to watch all 3 just because they like the program. So if you have kids, hopefully they'll enjoy it too. We also recently set up a Facebook group just for parents to kind of, share their troubles and struggles and homeschooling issues during this whole time. It's really just for fun. And we just started something last week called Win at Home. We are trying to help you as parents. If you're a parent, we're trying to equip you, energize you, encourage you as you try to win this season of life at home with your children, and also when they end up going back to school eventually, whenever that's going to be. So if you want to be on the mailing list, if you want to receive the stuff that we're sending out books, sometimes like little fun things, little tchotchkes and whatever. So if you want your kids to be part of that, you go to Win at Home. All of this stuff can be found at communitychurch.net/kids. You got the kids programs on there, the Facebook group, and the sign up for Win at Home. So check that out. Well, if you've been with us for a while, you hear me say this every week, but I think it's important to recognize that we are here because of the generosity of so many people. And if you're one of those people that supports us financially, I want to say thank you. We wouldn't be able to do what we're doing. We wouldn't be able to support the community the way that we're doing it if it wasn't for you and your generosity. So we really appreciate that. And if you want to join in with us, if you want to partner with us, you can do that at communitychurch.net/give. But if this isn't your church home, if you're new to this, especially if you're new to the whole church thing, don't feel any pressure to give. We don't operate that way. We are just glad that you are tuning in with us today. All right, so the last thing I want to let you know about is really not something that's specific to Community Church, but I found it really cool, so I just kind of want to pass it along to you. And if you, at this point in your little quarantine life, have exhausted your Netflix selection, right, and you're looking for something else to watch, Allie and I came across this show. It's unlike anything I've ever seen before. It is the largest crowd-funded project ever. It's totally supported by donations. And it's not specifically tied to any streaming service or any TV station. It's totally, totally independent. It's a show about Jesus. Now, let me just say something really quick. Personally, I think this is the best depiction of Jesus I've ever seen in any kind of movie or program. His personality is so attractive. He's such a fascinating figure. And I think it's probably pretty accurate to how he actually was. I mean, people loved him. People who were nothing like him loved him and wanted to just follow him around everywhere. Normally when you see Jesus in a show, he speaks very oddly with some British accent for some reason. He doesn't look Middle Eastern, and he's just kind of a weird kind of guy. And then the stuff that he says is often very, very cheesy. There's a lot of cheese in a lot of faith-based programs. This, I would say, there are few moments where there's like an edge of cheese, just an edge. And if you can overlook that, I think this show will help you get a pretty cool picture of what Jesus was probably like. So that's called The Chosen. The only way you can get it, the only way you can watch the show, it's not connected to a station. The only way you can watch it is by going on your phone or your tablet, your device, and downloading an app called The Chosen. There's a picture of a guy as the app icon. Don't let that scare you. But you just click on it, and the only way you can watch it, they host the episodes on the actual app. So take a minute, download that app. You might find it pretty interesting. So yeah, I hope that's helpful for you. Well, that's all I've got for you today. Thanks for hanging out with us, especially in my office. This is gonna be a little bit different, but we're gonna roll with it today, see how it goes. I hope that you enjoy this morning's service, that you feel like you're part of a community, that you feel connected, even though we're not together in the same building. We are part of one community, and I'm grateful that you're part of it. So hope you enjoy this week's online service.
All the money that the world could hold, mountains made of solid gold, riches that could buy my dreams. You are better than all these things. The prettiest face to turn their eyes, beauty that could hypnotize, the open doors that looks may bring. You are better than all these things. 'Cause your love is better than life. You are the well that won't run dry. I have tasted and I have seen. You are better than all these things. Shake the moon, most important one in every room. Status matched by only kings. You are better than all these things. 'Cause your love is better than life. You are the well that won't run dry. And I have tasted and I have seen. Better than all these things. Your love is better than life. You are the well that won't run dry. And I have tasted and I have seen. You are better than all these things. Being liked and loved by everyone, approval that outshines the sun, cheered by all who think of me. You are better than all these things. You are better than all these things. 'Cause your love is better than life. You are the well that won't run dry. I have tasted and I have seen.
This week, we are in part 4 of a series called Roots. Now, if you're just joining us, if this is your first week with us, you might kind of feel like you just turned on the movie right in the middle of it. And if you did, you might want to go back and listen to some of the earlier messages, but we'll kind of bring you up to speed, tell you a little bit about what we're talking about here. The question we're asking for this series is, how do we grow spiritually? How do we make progress in our spiritual lives? And before we go into that, I feel like it's important to kind of address, all of us, most of us, have a different picture when we talk about spiritual growth. We have a different picture of what the end goal is. And what I just want to kind of clarify, make sure we're all on the same page here, is that we are not talking about becoming the perfect church person who does all the right things and knows all the right church things to say and goes through all the motions or knows every single historical, theological fact. We're not talking about becoming a gigantic theological brain, right? What we're talking about is getting to the place where we are totally confident internally in who God is and in what he says. So when life is crazy, when everything around us is shaken, we can be unshakable. When there's a storm on the outside, there could be peace on the inside. When things are uncertain, like they are right now, we can be certain that there is a God who loves us, who is not forgotten about us, and is going to see us through this whole thing. Even though things may be tough and uncertain, ultimately it's not like it's just out of control. And so the question is, how do we get there? I told you about somebody that I met when I first started, when I was in college, and there was this girl who's from the inner city who had this really crazy life, lots and lots of struggles, and yet there was this joy that she lived with. There was this peace that she lived with. She did not know what each day was going to bring, and yet she seemed unshakable. And for the first time, I was like, I want that in my life. And that's what we're working toward. That's the picture we're trying to get at. And so when we think about spiritual growth, what we said is what's growing within us when we're growing spiritually? What's actually happening in there, right? And we said that it is our faith that's growing. It's our faith. Well, we tried to break that down a little bit too and said, okay, faith is one of those words you hear about a lot in the church. It's used in a lot of different contexts and a lot of different ways. What do we talk about when we say faith? Faith, put it simply, is confidence or trust that God is who he says he is and that he'll do what he says he'll do. So when we're growing in that kind of confidence, we're growing spiritually. Now, if you know anything about confidence, you know confidence can't just be mustered up. You can't just try to be more confident or try to trust someone just because you want to. If you're a parent, let's say you have a baby who's 1, and a stranger just comes up to you and says, hey, can I have your child for an hour? I'll bring them back. Trust me. You'd probably be like, even if you really wanted to, it'd be really hard to. Or if I came up to you and said, no, trust them, I don't know if that trust has been built yet, right? Trust is not something that can be mustered up. It's something that has to be earned or built. And so we're asking, how do we build our trust, our confidence in God? What we introduced you to a couple weeks ago is something called the 5 faith catalysts. Now, we didn't coin that term. We didn't make it up. We're not that smart. But these are 5 things that we believe that God uses to build our faith, to grow our faith. It came from a pastor. His name's Andy Stanley. He's a really well-known pastor in the kind of church world. And what he said is that in every conversation he's ever had where he's asked someone how their faith has grown, the things that they list always fall into these 5 categories. And we've tried this. I tried this at the last church that I worked at and tried it here on social media on our Community Church Instagram account and said, what has God used in your life to grow your faith? And everything that's listed falls into at least one of these 5 categories. And so if we know what these 5 faith catalysts are, we can be on the lookout for them. We can try and put them into our lives, incorporate them into our lives, weave them into our lives. And that will help our faith to grow. And so on week 1, we talked about, or actually it was week 2, but the first faith catalyst we talked about was what we call practical teaching. And what you hear people say when you ask them, they'll say, well, I went to this church, or I went to this conference, or I took this course, or this person, somebody opened up the Bible to me, or opened up the teachings of Jesus and explained them to me in a way that I could understand and apply, in a way I could actually practice. And when I did it, I saw that that it worked. And so we defined practical teaching as information that leads to application. It's something you understand and then do. Not just learning, not just like, taking in information, which is the temptation for a lot of people, but to hear something and then to do it, to put it into practice. And what happens is when we do that, our faith grows. It's like if you're sick and you go to the doctor and you say, "Doc, I'm sick, I need help." And he says, "Here, take this," whatever it is. And then you take it and then you feel better. When you apply the information or instruction that he's given you and you see that it works, your confidence in him will grow. You'll trust him. He'll be the guy that you go to next time, probably, right? So it increases our confidence, increases our faith in God. Second thing we talked about was Tom last week. He talked about providential relationships. And the big idea for last week was that faith, growing faith, and even like living out the life of faith, it's not a me thing, it's a we thing. A lot of times faith or religion can kind of fall into one of those categories of things we don't talk about, right? Like politics and sex. And so it becomes super private. It's just like between me and myself. And when we do that, we're actually selling ourselves short, way short. Tom told you a story about a friend that he had that had a profound impact on his life because he was willing to talk about his faith with him. And if we'll allow other people in, you'll see people have the same struggles, doubts, hangups that you do. Some of them have worked through those things already, and we will make each other stronger if we will kind of step out of our comfort zone and let other people in. If faith becomes a we thing and not just a me thing, right? So practical teaching, providential relationships. Today we're on Faith Catalyst number 3. And before I tell you what the Faith Catalyst is, I'm not just going to give it away. I want you to think about something. Okay? Here's my question. Ready? A little self-reflection time. Okay? Think about a time in your life when you tried to make a big change and it didn't really work out. Did it ever happen to you? I don't know about you, but if you're like me, like I get excited about things all the time, and I want to make a big change. And so what I tend to do is take big steps to make a big change. I remember maybe like a year or so, maybe a little more than a year, Allie and I decided we're going to get organized. I'm like, great, let's do it. I call up the dumpster company and have a 30-foot dumpster delivered to our driveway. And I'm like, let's go, we're throwing things away. Right? Like take kind of these like drastic measures. And what happens is usually when we do that, it's like we take these gigantic steps, and a lot of times it's not really easy to maintain when we take these huge drastic steps. Or maybe a better example would be like getting in shape. I don't know about you, but like I watched a documentary on Netflix. I'm like, that's it. I'm never eating meat again. Or I'm going vegan. Or I'm like, whatever. We get like or I'm only eating meat. That was also a thing. And so we get like super excited, take these like super extreme steps, and really these things, sometimes you can take huge steps and it'll work, but usually it's not that effective. It's not that effective. In fact, what the whole realm of psychology is figuring out, what we've known for a while now, is that most often and most effectively, we see big change from small steps. Small steps. In fact, what a lot of people argue is that to change your life, you have to change your habits. I get really excited about habits and routines, rhythms, stuff like that. I just read a book. It's called Atomic Habits by James Clear. I actually read it twice. Highly recommend it. It's really cool, really insightful. But he talks about this whole idea of life change. And they did this experiment with this guy who was struggling for years, like his whole adult life. He was struggling to lose weight, never really could make any progress with it. He would set these grand, big goals, and it would just fail over and over and over again. And then eventually, they kind of took this principle, tried to put it into practice with him, and they said, all right, listen, here's your goal. Here's your goal. Here's how you'll succeed, right? Just wake up every day and put your shoes on. That's it. Put them on time. First step, like your running shoes. That's all we want you to do. And when you do that, you check off your box and you have succeeded for the day if you do that. And so he's like, okay, I can do that. And he did. And eventually that became a habit. And eventually, you can probably guess, like he started walking around his house. And then he started walking around his block. And then one day he decided, okay, maybe I'll try and run. And it just snowballed. And eventually, like fast forward to the end of the story, he loses 100 pounds. The only thing he committed to was putting his shoes on every morning. That's it. Small steps that led to a huge change. Now, I would argue, and I think Jesus teaches, that the same is true when it comes to growing our faith, our relationship with God. I tend to think, big steps. I'll go to some conference, hear a teacher, hear a pastor, read a book, get excited and be like, that's it, big change, right? I'm selling my house and moving to Africa. Or I'm going to do a 40-day fast once a month for the rest of my life. Or we set these big, grand goals because we think big change, big growth in our faith is going to come from big goals. And sometimes drastic steps do need to be taken. Every once in a while, you have to do a big thing, right? But that's the exception rather than the rule. What I'd argue is that we will see huge growth in much smaller, consistent steps. So today, what we're talking about, our faith catalyst, is something that we call private disciplines. Private disciplines. These are, how we'll define it for today is small steps that lead to huge faith. Small steps, huge faith, or small habits that lead to huge faith. What you'll hear when you ask somebody and they mention these things, what they'll say is like, well, for the first time, I decided I was going to pray every morning when I woke up. Like, even if it's just for a minute, I would say like a quick prayer for the day. Or I would pray before I went to bed. Or you hear people say, well, I decided in the car I was going to start listening to a Christian radio station. Or you might hear people say, for the first time, I was given this like little daily reader and it would have a Bible verse and something to think about. And I decided I would do it every day. It took me 5 minutes. But that led to something else, which led to something else, which led to something else. Or I started reading the Bible, just like one small chapter in the Bible every single day. And sometimes it didn't make sense. Sometimes I didn't understand, but it led me to ask questions and snowball. And what you find is that big change comes from these really, really small steps, these private disciplines. And I'll tell you like right off the bat, for me, when it comes to these 5 faith catalysts, for me, this is the biggest one. This is the one that has had the most profound impact on my life and the thing that I rely on literally on a daily basis. These things are huge for me. And here's the thing about private disciplines. They take like faith and they make it personal. Now, it might sound a little bit like I'm contradicting what Tom said last week, how faith's not a me thing, it's a we thing. It definitely is a we thing. We want to let people in, but we're letting people into our faith, right? Or you're letting me into your faith. It's a faith that is yours. It's not your mom's faith, it's not your grandmother's faith, it's not your dad's faith. And these are the things, these private things are the things that fuel our relationship with God. When we start doing things that are just between us and God. So there's this passage in Matthew's gospel. That's the story about Jesus according to Matthew. Matthew followed Jesus around. He was with him for years. And apparently he took good notes. So we have the gospel of Matthew. And Matthew records I think Jesus' famous sermon. Okay? Most famous sermon. It starts out with the Beatitudes, we call them, where he's like, well, blessed are the meek, blessed are the peacemakers, blessed, all these people, right? And then he goes into like the practical, like everyday thing. And there's a whole chapter where he talks about what we could call private disciplines, things that you do that are between you and God, like these relational things. Now, before I read these to you, I have to tell you, one thing about Jesus, like one of the craziest things, like the most countercultural things that he taught was how to relate to God. Jesus introduced people to God as a father, right? The people in that culture, in the ancient Jewish culture that Jesus was part of, they understood God as a distant power figure, really, a distant figure of authority, a judge, a rule giver, the one that you just don't want to make angry, right? And Jesus introduced them to God as much more of a loving, caring father. Not a pushover, not a mush, but somebody who wants to have a close, intimate relationship with you. In fact, it's pretty interesting. In the Gospel of John, or the story of Jesus according to John, there's actually this story where the religious teachers hear Jesus praying and they want to kill him. They accuse him of blasphemy. And the reason why is because he refers to God as his Father. Now, at that time in Jewish culture, the Jewish leaders, Jewish people, they prayed to God and they called him Father. But when they did, they used the term Ab. Ab was the word for father, but it was a very formal fatherly address, right? It was a very formal way to address your father. When Jesus prayed, he used the word Abba. Abba is the way a child would call to his father. It was a much, much more intimate, personal, relational, informal way to address God. And it was so informal that the religious teachers thought that it had crossed way past the line. There's no way you can address the creator of the universe with that title. And Jesus is like, I have more to show you about God, right? So Jesus introduces God in a much more, God the Father, in a much more relational, personal, intimate way. And we have to see this passage kind of through that lens. So Jesus is talking about here, he's talking about acts of righteousness. That's what he refers to them as. And I don't know when the last time you completed your acts of righteousness, but I haven't done them in a while. It's not like a term that we use. But what he's talking about here is in that ancient Jewish culture, there were three main pillars of practicing your religion. I know there's a lot of context here. Maybe you're checking out what's going on in the background right now, but just stick with me. It'll make sense. Okay. Right. There's three pillars of the ancient Jewish life. Three things every good Jew did at that time. They gave to the poor, they prayed, and they fasted. If you didn't do those things, you were you didn't cut the mustard, right? That was a big deal. You had to do that. And so what Jesus is going to do is kind of get his hands, he's going to start meddling in their religious practices. And he's going to show them, here's how you should be doing them, with the idea of in view of God as a father who wants to have a relationship with you, who wants you to know he can be trusted. Okay? So here's what he says. He says, be careful not to practice your righteousness, your acts of righteousness, in front of others to be seen by them. He says, if you do, you'll have no reward from your Father in heaven. It's that's it. You're not getting much out of them. So then he gives an example. He goes into the three things. He says, first, when you give to the needy, when you do that first thing, the giving, don't announce it with trumpets as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and on the streets. That was the word he used to address the religious teachers at that time, hypocrites. Fun fact, the word hypocrites in the original language, it just means actor. It's someone who wears a mask and pretends to be somebody that they're not. That's what he calls these religious teachers. He says, don't do it like they do, to be honored by others. That's why they do it. He says, truly I tell you, they've received their reward in full. The language there is the language of a transaction. He's saying they've gotten what they've paid for. They wanted that from others. That's why they did it. And that's what they got. People said, hey, great job. You're super spiritual. We want to be like you. And that's it. But it's, in terms of God, what your Father sees, what he cares about, they've gotten nothing, because he knows why they're doing it. He says, truly I tell you, they received their reward in full. He says, but you, when you give to the needy, don't let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that your giving may be done in secret. Then your Father, who sees what's done in secret, will reward you when you give in secret. So, that reward, what is it? I don't know. And I think that there's a reason why Jesus says there will be a reward. But I don't know what that reason is either. Here's what I do know. Giving is an act of faith. It's an act of confidence. Think about it. Think about how many decisions, money, decisions in your life are determined by money. Right? What job you're going to take, money has a big say in that. Where you're going to live, money has a big say in that. What car are you going to drive? Well, usually money has a big say in that. And some of that is unavoidable, don't get me wrong. But if we're not careful, money can, and usually does, turn into the thing we put our confidence in. So what happens? Well, once the money is uncertain, then all of a sudden we have no confidence. Then we're a mess because we don't know where money is going to come from, because that's what we've put our confidence in. And what Jesus is saying here is when you give, right? And you're not doing it so that people will pat you on the back, right? But when you give and it's between you and God, it's just like a secret thing basically between you and God. One, there's no room for corruption because no one else knows about it. There's no room for false motives. But two, you are starving your confidence in money and feeding your confidence in God. And what I love about this, now don't get me wrong, a little disclaimer here. This is not a message about giving to the church, right? This is about how this part is about how giving can increase, the private discipline of giving can increase your confidence in God. If you're going to give to the food pantries, especially right now. Give somewhere else. This is not about like giving your money to the church. But when we do that, it's a tangible way of taking our faith, our confidence away from money and putting it in God. And the great thing is, like, you don't even have to be there emotionally to do it. You don't have to be excited about it. You don't have to feel good about it. You could just do it. It's like when Allie and I first got married, we were house parents at this children's home. First got married, 22. And we had to take care of kids in a house ages 9 to 18. We were like mom and dad for them. I don't know how that happened, and it didn't last very long. But we had a house full of kids, and one of them I had to teach how to drive. That was a scary experience. And I would like talk to him about it. I'd explain, hey, here's what you do, here's what you don't do, whatever. But at some point, I had to get out of the driver's seat and let him into the driver's seat to see if he could be trusted. To see like, okay, here you go, you take the wheel. That's kind of like the cool thing about giving. You don't have to be excited about it, right? You could just be like, okay, fine, I'll try it. I'll give like a tiny bit. I'll give a portion. I'll give a percentage. I'll give. I won't be happy about it, but I'll give, and I'm going to watch, and I'm going to see what happens. I'm going to see how I feel. I'm going to see how that like maybe starts to change the way I feel about money. How maybe that increases my confidence in God. How when I look back on the fact that I gave, like whether that's something I regret or not. Now, I'm not saying that like you give $2, God's going to give you back 4. Sometimes it works like that, but there's no promise of that, right? That's not necessarily a thing that happens. But the idea, what I know, a reward that you can take away from this is increased confidence in God, right? Because we're putting our dependence on him. Then he goes on. I don't want to get too stuck in the details here, but he goes on. He talks about praying. Same formula. He says, don't do it like the hypocrites do. They love to pray, standing in the synagogues and on the street corners to be seen by others. Truly, I tell you, they have received their reward in full. They got what they paid for. If they wanted people to pat them on the back, they got it. He says, but when you pray, I want you to go in your room, close the door, and pray to your Father. Make it between you and him. And your Father, who sees what's done in secret, will reward you. You'll get something out of it. Now, I don't know what the reward is, but here's what I do know. I do know that praying is an act of confidence, just like giving is, praying is. If you look at Jesus gives them an example, right? He says, like, this is how you should pray. You might know this prayer as the Lord's Prayer or the Our Father. He says, Our Father in heaven. And all of this, it's one statement of confidence and dependence after the next. He says, Our Father. There's that term of intimacy, Abba, right? Hallowed be your name. He says, like, let everybody know, let people know that how good you are. Let your name be set apart like no one else. You're in a category on your own, right? Hallowed be your name. He says, your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. What he's saying there is like, up in heaven, things are probably pretty good right now, right? It's probably a culture of like love, joy, peace, right? Things that are really good. He's like, bring that here. Let us be the kind of people that bring that here. Your kingdom come. Let it be like you're ruling here, just like you are in heaven. It's a statement of dependence, like bring these things about here. Then he says, give us our daily bread. Like we depend on you, we need you, and forgive us our debts where we've fallen short, as we also forgive our debtors. Like help us, lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. It's constantly over and over again. We need your help. It's an exercise of confidence. And the reward, I don't know exactly what the reward is, but I know that if we'll take time, set aside time every day to pray, like to make this a private discipline, we'll see that like maybe it'll start to change the way we see the day. Maybe we'll start to depend more on God. Maybe if we start to tell God what we need, we might see that he'll provide what we need. It's an act of faith. It's an act of confidence. So Jesus is saying, make it between you and God. Make it something that builds your relationship. Then the last thing he says is fasting. Same formula. He says, don't do it like the hypocrites do. They disfigure their faces to show others they're fasting. He says they've received their reward in full. They got what they paid for. They got the pat on the back they wanted. He says, but when you do it, put oil on your head and wash your face. Which seems like a little contradiction there, right? But no, the idea is like, don't look healthy, look good. Don't make a big deal out of it. Like, don't make it something that people are patting you on the back for. This is between you and God. And then you'll be rewarded. Now, I don't know what the reward is, but here's what I do know. Fasting is actually also an exercise of faith. It's a way of like teaching yourself, literally starving your like dependence on food, like your physical needs, as a reminder of your spiritual needs, like how only God can meet our spiritual needs. And so that hunger reminds us of this hunger. And it's a reminder that God meets our physical needs as well, but it's an exercise of faith. Now, here's what's important to know, right? Jesus is not necessarily prescribing these three things. He's giving people a way to do the things they were already doing in private. That doesn't mean we shouldn't do these things. Doesn't mean we shouldn't give, shouldn't pray, or shouldn't fast. But the point here, the main point here, is that he wants us to have private things that we do that are just between us and God. Private disciplines. Now, like I told you earlier, this for me has been the most influential thing in my life. For 11 years now, these have been the things that keep me going. My sophomore year of college, I came to a point where I was very unimpressed with God. It wasn't really God wasn't really somebody I wanted to know. Definitely never thought I'd be working in a church ever. In fact, I had a conversation with my mom my freshman year, and I remember literally saying, I know I will never be a pastor in a church. I would never want to do that. I said that my freshman year, okay? And what happened was, like, I came to a point where I was like, you know what? I need to know. Is this a thing or is it not? Am I wasting my time, or can I just go, like, do my own thing? If God is real, then maybe I want in on this. But if he's not, then forget it. So I want answers for myself. And for the first time, right? I set aside time to pray and to read every day. It wasn't always a long time. A lot of times it was a short time. But I took a little piece of paper and I put it in the front of my Bible. And I wrote my prayers on it. I'm not like a big writer. I didn't write like a big, long, lofty journal entry. I just would write literally the things. Like, here's what I need. And then I left a column. Like, I drew a line down the middle. And I left a place for those prayers to be answered, to write down the answers to those prayers. And what was amazing was that as I did that, I started to see, it almost seemed like there was somebody who was listening to my prayers. And while I definitely didn't like always get what I asked for, I was amazed constantly how things just seemed to line up. It was like somebody was listening. There's an author that I like to read, his name's C.S. Lewis. He said, like, there comes a point in your life, like, imagine having a rope in your hand and it's just limp and you're like, you don't know where it ends, but you're like pulling. It's like there comes a point in your life, like with God, where it's like you pull on the rope and all of a sudden you feel a tug back. And it's this feeling like there's somebody on the other end of the rope. That's the best way I could describe how it felt. Like, it was startling seeing like there's actually someone here who's stepping in and doing something about my situation. And what started as a small thing eventually became something that was like, I could not have that in my routine. And even 11 years later, it's something that I've come to rely on more and more and more. Even like starting this church, this was one of the scariest things that Allie and I have ever done. And that little list I told you about, there were many lists after that, and eventually it morphed into a journal. Now, like I said, I don't like to write long entries, so I got something called a 5-year journal. And it'll have like January 1st, but it'll be like January 1st, 2019, 2020, 2021. And you can write like a sentence or two each day. And what I started doing is just writing like, okay, here's what I'm worried about now. Here's what I need God to do for us now. And I'm telling you, we started with like nothing. We had to leave where I was working on the North Shore and just kind of step out and hope things are going to work. It was one of the most, I think it was the scariest step of faith that we've ever had to take. But what I can tell you is that even now, I'll go back some mornings, I'll go back and I'll just read through my journal and I'll be like, look at what I wanted there and look at how God answered here. And I'll see the things that he didn't answer and be like, we asked him to do this and he didn't. But could you imagine if he did? If he did, we would be in a place right now we don't want to be, or this thing wouldn't have happened if he let that happen. And you could see it's like there's someone on the other end of the rope. It was an amazing, amazing experience. And this is something that I rely on at least 5 days a week. Early in the morning, I set aside time where I just read and try and like feed myself. It's just between me and God. And here I am like shouting with the trumpets and being like, look at me, I pray. But I'm not doing this to give myself a pat on the back. It's just like, it's like one beggar telling another where to find bread, right? This is, if you do this, small steps, you will see that a relationship will start to form, and you'll see he can be trusted. Every time we've needed something that God has come through and answered in an unexpected way, it has increased our faith big time. Just the other day, literally 3 days ago, okay? I'm recording this on Wednesday, all right? So earlier in the week, our daughter Mia, I told you a story a couple weeks ago. She's learning how to ride a bike. Her bike right now, for a number of reasons, it's not really ideal, right? And we have been talking about maybe getting her another bike. Should we do it? Should we wait for her birthday? We want her to be able to ride it. And we're just kind of going back and forth about it. And Allie, like, just kind of casually in her like morning time that she spends by herself, she just prayed about it. She's like, help us figure out a situation for the bike, right? And maybe that sounds a little bit crazy to you, right? That we're praying about bikes for our kids. But this is the kind of relationship that Jesus is talking about here, like an intimate like relationship, like you would talk to your father, someone who cares about you, who loves you. And it's like I said, it almost sounds silly saying like, okay, yeah, she prayed for a bike. And it was nuts. Just 2 days ago, they were out walking on the street, just out on the road, and a man she had never met before walked out of his house, literally walked up to her and said, hey, do you want a bike? My daughter has a bike and she's not using it anymore. Would your daughter like it? And Allie just about fell over. And 99 times out of 100, that's not how it works. But it was one of those reminders that there's a God who cares about you, who cares about the big things and the little things, and who wants you to run to him as a child runs to their father. Jesus said, I want you to come to me like little children, right? With that kind of faith, just talking about what you need and what you want. And so here's what I want you to do. I want you to think about not a big thing. I don't want you to move to Africa. I mean, unless that's like what you really got to do, right? What's a small habit, a small step you can incorporate into your faith? This is not a one-size-fits-all thing, okay? A lot of times, I think sometimes churches get this wrong a little bit, where we'll say like, well, if you want to grow in your faith, you got to read the Bible and you got to pray in the corner in a quiet room, and and so what happens is the people that love to read and love to be alone end up being seen as like the good Christians who are always praying and always reading their Bible. But there are some people who hate reading. There are other people who can't sit still. And so you got to find what works for you. I know somebody who like goes out on his boat, and for him, that's where he feels like connected with God. That's where he feels most comfortable, like praying to God. I know other people that go for walks in nature. I want you to find a way that a small way that you can connect with God. Maybe you find like a faith-based radio station, right? That will start to like teach you. Maybe you're in the car and you decide, okay, I'm going to start listening to this on a regular basis. And so you're being fed. And it's a private thing that starts to fuel your relationship with God. We just sent out it's called the Jesus Storybook Bible to all our parents whose information that we have. It's a super, super insightful explanation of it's a kid's story. It's a kid's story. Something you read to your kids. But when I read it to our kids, I get more out of it than I think my kids do. And it's because it's the Bible in super plain, understandable language. And it's profound. Maybe you make that a routine where you're like, okay, every night I'm just going to read this for my kids, for them, also for me. And you might be surprised how that kind of snowballs a little bit. One thing we're going to try, we're going to do it for the rest of the month of May, just to kind of maybe like give you a little boost. On our app, I'll put up another video where I explain all the details of this, but on our app, you can enable notifications and you can enable categories of notifications. So there's the general ones where we tell you like, if the church is shutting down because of a global pandemic. And then there's another one we're going to start, and we'll call it something like, private practices or disciplines or small steps or something that has to do with this, right? But if you enable that, what we're going to do is we're going to send you just like a little verse and a little explanation, just like something to think about for the day. And maybe you take that and you spend like a minute thinking about it, or maybe you try to remind yourself of it later in the day to help increase your faith. It's really interesting. I read this book not too long ago. It's called Peak. It's why the people that are the best in the world at certain things, why they're the best in the world at certain things. And what they said is that what it comes down to is basically what they call a growth mindset. Typically, when we start something, we go into it with a growth mindset. Like a lot of people when they're new to church, they go in with a growth mindset. They're like, okay, I got a lot to learn. I better start listening. And then they grow and they grow and they grow and they grow. And then eventually they're satisfied with where they are and they plateau. And that's how it stays. Great example of this is driving, right? When you're 16, 17, 18, you're like learning how to drive, trying to figure out like how do you hold the wheel, how do you like whatever, pump the brakes, all that stuff. Then eventually you get to a point where you're like, okay, got this, right? If doing something for a long time made you better at it, then 70 and 80-year-old people would be the best drivers in the world. They'd be experts and amazing. But that's not always the case, right? And it's because eventually you get satisfied. And that happens in the church. Happens a lot, where we get to a point where we're like, okay, I'm pretty good. I got my little routine. If we're honest, that confidence is not growing the way it could be because we're kind of gotten a little stagnant. So what can you do? What's one small thing that you can do to increase your faith? A private thing between you and God that can help fuel your relationship with Him. If you do that, I believe that you might find yourself in a place not too like far from now. You might find yourself in a place you never thought you'd be, with a kind of faith that is way more stable than maybe you thought you'd ever have. And it won't be because of some grand, crazy, huge, drastic decision you made. It will be because of a small step that you took, that you turned into a habit. So that's what I want to leave you with this week. Thanks for tuning in with us. Thanks for hanging out with us again. And until we connect next time, hope you have a great week. All right, so before I let you go, I just want to show you how to enable those daily notifications on your phone, if that's something that you're interested in. The first thing you got to do is download the Community Church app. And the best way to do that is just go to our website, communitychurch.net, go all the way to the bottom, and there's a button. You click that, that'll give you the options to go to the app store that you need for your device. Once you download it, you'll see it on your home screen or wherever you keep your apps. You open up the app, and in the top left corner, there's a little menu button. You click that menu button, and this little slider will slide on over. You go to the bottom of that and click Settings. Once you click Settings, you'll be brought to this other menu. On that menu, you click Notifications, and then you'll see these two sliders. There's General, which is for our general announcements, like you might have been getting these already. We'll tell you if something goes live, or if there's an important announcement we need to let you know, like a weather closing, something like that, that's gonna be in General. But then there's the Today's Big Idea option, and that's what we're talking about for this whole message, right? The daily updates. If you slide that over to the right, make sure that it's green. That shows you that it's enabled, and that will make sure that you're getting these updates every single day, to start off with, at least for the month of May. So that's how you do it. Since I already said goodbye at the end of the message, now we have to do like, you know, like the awkward second goodbye. So I'm just gonna